Today, we expose the brutal truth about Vladimir Putin, Russia, and Ukraine. My guest is Ambassador Georgette Mosbacher, former U.S. ambassador to Poland, and one of the few people alive who's seen how deep Russia's propaganda war really goes. She reveals how Putin didn't just invade Ukraine with soldiers, he invaded with disinformation, AI, and psychological warfare. And we let him.
There are two totally different schools of thought on this. One is to just calm Putin down, and the other one is to wipe Putin out.
We talk about American weakness, European cowardice, and why the Biden administration gave Ukraine just enough to survive, but never enough to win. Ambassador Mosbacher doesn't hold back. She says if she had been negotiating with Putin, she would have bombed Moscow and then called to say, "Don't take it personally, Vladimir." She says America has been asleep while our enemies build influence campaigns, turn social media into weapons, and use artificial intelligence to destabilize democracies. We dig into the lies, the missed opportunities, and the question no one in power can answer. What does winning even look like? This episode is not comfortable, it's not polite, and it is urgent.
This idea that you can wage war and have some sort of humanitarian aspect to it, I think is absurd, because by definition, war is about death and destruction.
Ambassador Mosbacher, you're a good friend. I appreciate you coming on some future day. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible episode. Ambassador Georgette Mosbacher, it is such an honor and a pleasure to have you join me today on Some Future Day. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I always know it's going to be interesting when I'm with you.
Well, we were just talking a second ago about this horrific, useless, and senseless murder of two young 20-somethings who were planning their engagement in Washington, D.C. They were murdered because they attended an event, a Jewish event, and they were murdered because of their religion in our nation's capital. As an ambassador a former ambassador of the United States, what would you say to the American public at this moment in time? By the way, it's worth mentioning that the individual who was arrested, he was when he was in handcuffs from the police, he was screaming "Free Palestine." So it does signal that this is a religious, anti-Semitic motivated crime. But again, he was just arrested. He's not found guilty. Obviously, we have the Constitution in the United States here. But what's your take on this type of a thing?
Look, Constitution or no Constitution, all right, Mark? I really don't care. This, for a young couple to be shot dead in our capital because they were Jewish is something, if every American today, and if every media outlet is not leading right now with this story, condemning it in the strongest possible terms, then we're complicit. And we will have more of this and see more of this. And I don't care whether it's our capital or if it was on a farm in Iowa. This is unacceptable. And what it says about the security in our country, what it says that anyone could think they could do this, is every American needs to take responsibility for this and speak out and condemn this, because that's the only way we are going to stop this kind of thing. I'm just horrified. I don't know what else to say.
It's a slippery slope. It becomes hunting season for Jews, and you have these pundits, frankly, on both the left and the right now. The right has a little faction also that is spewing such anti-Israel, anti-Jewish rhetoric that it could inflame. I mean, do you think this type of a thing? You remember that terrible murderer, the killer, this guy Luigi. Remember this guy?
Oh, yeah.
And they made him out to be a hero. I wouldn't be surprised if the left-wing mob makes this individual, this killer, I think his last name is Rodriguez, into a hero like Luigi.
Mark, if that happens, That is something I can only say that it takes all of us to literally scream them down. And, you know, screaming, we always say that doesn't work. Well, in this case, we scream that far left down. We need to condemn them. We need to isolate them. And we need to call them out for what they are. And um, anyone who could possibly make a hero out of someone that shoots them dead and I don't even care whether you're right or left or Jewish or Palestinian. I don't even care. You don't shoot people dead for any reason. And if we aren't screaming this as loud as we can, then shame on us. Shame on us.
Do you, do you think America has some kind of a mental illness right now, like a deep-rooted mental illness where an individual would think it's okay to murder two young people enjoying their lives in Washington, D.C. at night? Like this, it's not surprising, right? Like you're not surprised
No.
to learn of this news. You're
That,
just extremely disappointed that
what
it's
does that
happening.
say, though? Mark, what does it say that I'm not surprised? Or that you're not surprised? What does that say? That's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? The fact that we aren't surprised that someone can shoot dead a young couple because they're Jewish, that alone, there is a derangement in that, Mark. There is a derangement in that. Now, I don't know exactly what the genesis of that is, um, but I do think that when you have a far left media that could possibly find anything positive about that, they're deranged. And and I don't know what we do about it except what we're doing right now, you and me, condemning it, talking about it, making it a priority to say this is not something that any human being but should find acceptable under any circumstances for any reason.
Ambassador Mosbacher, like your life and your career has been just so illustrious. You've done so much in the private sector and the public sector, um, all over the planet, not just here in the United States, but beyond into Europe. You have friends and allies across every continent. You know people all over the world. Have you ever seen anything like this before in our nation's history? Does this remind you in your lifetime of a particular historic moment where America had this type of mental illness where they were shredded politically, so divided, so polarized that they would resort to this level of violence?
Mark, that's a good question. And I have to think way, way, way back at my age, but um, there was there was a time during the Vietnam War when we were ugly, um, when we spit on our own troops that came back, when they were only doing their duty. Um, we sent them there. So I do think that there are times when politics uh, really interfere or somehow we allow those negative voices to dominate the dialogue, and then it brings out the worst in people. So there probably are other times. I think the thing right now that we should be asking ourselves is what have we learned from those times that we could repeat any of that behavior. But Mark, I I sit here not I'm in Greece at the moment talking to you, And I just came from Poland. And when I think about the death and destruction that's taking place in Ukraine, we are dropping bombs and shooting people dead. You know, we're in 2020, 2025, 21st century. All this technology, all this knowledge, everything we're supposed to learn from the First World War, from the Second World War, and then throughout history. And you have to ask yourself, how are we dropping bombs and shooting people dead in a country not that far from here? Have we learned nothing? And what's the answer to that question, Mark? I guess we haven't, or we wouldn't be doing it. So I don't know where we go from this. I mean, I've heard arguments that this is the beginning of the end of this civilization. Maybe, as negative and as that may be, if we're not willing to take a look at these things and examine them for what they are, and say, you know, it's never going to happen again. And we've heard that before, haven't we? We've heard that throughout history. It's never going to happen again. But then it does. So where does that lead us? What does that say about us? What does it say about all this technology and all of this that's supposed to enrich our lives and take us forward if we're still killing each other in the most primitive way? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Ambassador. Like you talk about the advances of human civilization. You're using technology or emerging
Mm,
technologies as a tentpole, but that applies across beautiful moments in time with artwork, with literature, with music. Our architecture is highly advanced and sophisticated. There's a lot of beauty that humanity has brought to the world. But then you take us to 2025 and the world's on fire. It's not
right,
just here in the United States with
right.
this incident, but look at you mentioned Europe, the Middle East is on fire. There are regions in Africa that we don't talk about a lot here in the West, but they're on fire. Certainly, you wouldn't be surprised if we saw some flare up in China, Taiwan. Why do you think humanity is in such a state of turmoil right now? And where do you think we're going?
Hmm. Look, when I think about what's going on in North Korea, people are starving. It's hard to wrap your head around that with all this technology and the ability to do what we do. Um, I think a lot of it comes down to leadership. Uh, you know, um, Great leaders have, throughout history, have rewritten history in a positive way. Um, Also, I think it's about media, Mark, quite honestly. We get messages from a lot of places now. And as you said earlier, there are these website podcasts, etc. A lot more than we had even 10 years ago. So there's a lot more hate being spewed. And unfortunately, it reaches more people. This hate speech, this, whether you want to call it, even these misinformation campaigns. As ambassador to Poland, I watched Russia do that very effectively, right? These campaigns to really work people up over historical dissents and so forth. It's become an art form, if not a science. And we're seeing more and more of that where they manipulate. And Mark, maybe this is naive, but we've talked about brainwashing for as long as I can remember. It is not a new concept. Um, People log on to these websites where they hear this hate that works them up. And I was reading today, Mark, that pornography, that how pornography, young people are watching on their screens, their phones, how all this pornography they're taking in because they have access to it so easily, and it's hard to keep kids, control what they see. These are young minds. These are minds that are just being formed. And they're getting their information from a lot of places and a lot of bad people, a lot of hate speech, hate ideologies. I'm not sure, I know how much technology has made me more productive, Mark, but I'm not sure about this technology when it comes to information. If there isn't really a dark side to that we have not talked about enough, that we haven't figured out how to harness. And I wonder if that isn't driving a lot of this, because we can reach a lot more people today, a lot
For
more
sure.
people.
For sure. I agree with you, Ambassador. But here's something that's interesting. It's definitely driving it, right? I think social media has made it very simple for misinformation, hate messages, intolerance, a lack of unification. That's all happening. But there's another phenomenon that I've noticed recently because of something that happened with artificial intelligence in China and Taiwan. Um, People don't care either. Certain media outlets don't care if the narrative doesn't fit and they're not going to get those clicks. Even legacy media doesn't care. So Reuters, about a month ago, I'm curious if you've even heard of this, actually. Reuters about a month ago reported that they used artificial intelligence, the Chinese government, to put a campaign, a disinformation, misinformation campaign into Taiwan that was anti-American and anti-democratic. They used artificial intelligence to create messaging in video, in writing, and they had hyper-realistic photos that were pumped into the population in Taiwan, all with the purpose to malign America and democracy. And it wasn't but for the fact that somebody pointed this article out to me. I would never have known. I would not have seen it on any media, including, by the way, like Fox News or places that you might find your news. Um, so is it because we don't care also? Like, so there maybe this is a two-headed beast where the one side is everybody's got a microphone and we're sending all kinds of content out. That's where you started. But have we reached this point in time also where people and news don't care to report things like this unless they're going to get the clicks?
Well, look, I don't think that's new. I mean, yellow journalism has been around a long time. Anything to sell the newspaper or get the ratings. But I do believe in what you're describing. I did not hear about. But I saw firsthand in Poland and in Central Eastern Europe, Russia and China, North Korea, Iran had these campaigns to damage the American brand. And by the way, I remember asking for a poll so I could see how the American brand was standing up to Russia or any of China, other brands, and you could see the decline. And I will admit here, I did not personally have the skill set, nor did the embassy have the skill set to push back on this. I was just barely recognizing it, Mark. And that alone was hard enough because they were so good at it, damaging our brand, doing exactly what you just said that they were doing, and China was doing in Taiwan. That's not even new. The thing is that they're much better at it. They have far more outlets for it. It's easier for them to reach more people. And I'm not sure that we in the United States or even in U.S. government or the State Department have fully embraced the threat that this poses to us. And I know it wasn't a high priority when I was ambassador, and yet I felt it should be. I just didn't have the skill set to do it. And I think you're going to see a lot more of this, a lot more of this. And that's why this argument around TikTok and all this data, if you can manipulate, you have all that data and you know how to reach people and you know how to message them, you're in that business to some degree. And you're really, really good at it, Mark. I mean, you're one of the best in the world at messaging. You're one of the best in the world at creating a brand and managing an image. You're one of the best in the world. Well, Mark, you do it positively. But there are countries who want to damage our brand and want to make the United States, they want to weaken us and our values and how we see ourselves. And we have to take this seriously. We need to call on people like you to say, take a look at this. See, I didn't see what China did. You obviously did.
Yeah.
And I just have to tell you, we're going to see a lot more of that. And if we don't have our own plans and to counter that, we're going to lose this.
So when you were sitting in Poland as the American ambassador, you started to notice anti-American campaigns coming into the Polish marketplace from places like
Absolutely.
Russia?
Absolutely, because the Poles
Wow.
love Americans. They needed to discredit us. And the Russians needed to make the Poles feel like, you know what, you trust Americans? Well, maybe you shouldn't trust Americans. Maybe you should think about this. Maybe that trust is misplaced. And subtly, but very effectively, we're making those arguments over and over again in different ways. And you can just, you could see it across Central Eastern. Actually, you could see it. I asked to see it across Europe. And when I saw that there were people in Austria that trusted the Russians more than they trusted the Americans, I said, we got a problem. We have a problem.
Do you remember like what type of messaging Russia was sending into the Polish
You know,
marketplace?
it
Like
was
what it was?
so good that, for instance, they'd exploit our riots, all right, in the United States, and they'd only take the images that were most disturbing. And then they built a narrative around it saying, you see, they don't really have freedom of speech. You see, they're not really a tolerant society. I'm far more subtle than that, Mark, with experts that would say, well, actually, this is what happened, and this is why this happened. Just, they take the truth, just enough of it, and then they start to manipulate it to a very negative, to match their goal. And I saw that, and I'm sure tomorrow, we will see in different places around the world them take that murder in Washington, D.C., in our capital, and they're going to manipulate that. You see, the United States isn't safe. You see, the United States isn't tolerant. They caused this. And they're going to do that. And there are going to be a lot of people who say, yeah, well, wow, yeah, I don't see this happening anywhere else. I mean, and that's what happens.
So do you think that was starting at the top? Do you think that started with Putin?
Oh, I think it started back with the Nazis had an extraordinary machine. If you recall what we read about their disinformation, and so I think this has been going on as long as we've been able to communicate across any space. So newspapers, I think yellow journalism, where they can take a story and blow it up, or take a story that really is basically one off, but make it look like it's a big deal. So no, I think it's been going on for a long time. It's just far more sophisticated, far more difficult to spot. And it has a much broader audience because and technology has allowed us to reach a lot more people.
Ambassador Mosbacher, is America, though, also engaging in a counter war, a counter information war with the rest of the globe? We have radio stations, we have newspapers, we have all of the access to artificial intelligence. What are we doing as a nation to push back into these communist or monarchy types of regimes?
It's a good question, Mark. And here's the problem: we're a rule-based country, and we are also have all kinds of you know we we don't allow. We have all kinds of regulations. Right? That's a whole nother conversation. But we have a lot of regulations. We have a lot of regulations in this respect. So we can't do. They don't allow us to do what our enemies do. We can't have these bots and the these kind of things that they do. That is tying our hand behind one of our arms behind our back. Now, one could argue, well, we have to take this ethical approach. I get that. I get that. But it's very difficult to play in a in a playground where your opponent has no rules and you have a lot of them, a lot of regulations, a lot of rules, what you can do and what you can't do. It really does. And I look, some of these rules I understand they're ethic based and so forth, but a lot of these regulations don't make any sense either. But we know that already.
Yeah, but let's be honest. Like, let's talk about American ethics or American moral codes. Like, we're talking about media campaigns, propaganda from America into the rest of the world. But you said earlier it's 2025, and there are still bombs dropping like crazy in Ukraine right now. Yet we are the ones supplying Ukraine with a ton of military weaponry. We are the masters of war. Right? And the same thing would apply into the Middle East with Israel. Like, we are the masters of war, really. So, where does American ethics stand when it comes to situations of
Mark, let me just, if I can be more, just take it down to more something more specific. When Ukraine, when that war broke out, um, if I can just frame it, if we have the time just to frame it quickly. All right, all of our intelligence, everyone had the same intelligence that Putin was going to invade Ukraine, and we didn't believe it. Then we watched Putin put 200,000 troops on the border, and no one believed their own eyes. And then Putin invaded, and this is a little disturbing, I admit, but we've got to be honest. We watched everyone say, "You can have Ukraine if you take it fast." Okay, but then the Ukrainians proved to be these very patriotic, fierce warriors, and everyone, oh my God, they were embarrassed. Now, what do we do to help Ukraine? So, um, either there's two ways to look at this. You either let Ukraine go, and you let these aggressors do what they want, and that really is not an option, or you give them everything they need to win. What I think the Biden administration did was an incremental war, Mark. They gave them just enough to win a battle, but not enough to win the war. I think that's immoral. So either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. For it to go on and on and on like this. And, um, this idea that, and this is going to get me into trouble for saying this, but this idea that there's anything humane about war, that we have to let, refugees out, or we've got to let food in, or, I mean, I don't understand this. Certainly in World War II, no one worried about whether they bombed cities or whether children died or whether women died. I mean, war.
tons of German civilians died.
So, this idea that you can wage war and have some sort of humanitarian aspect to it I think it's absurd, because I think, by definition, war is about death and destruction. And so what do we do? What do we do? Do we give them everything they need to win? Or do we let them go? Um, I know from a personal how I see it, but I also understand another side of it. But I just don't know. I think President Trump is absolutely right. You have to stop the killing. You have to stop the killing and the destruction. Uh, and the question is, how do you do that? And there are two totally different schools of thought on this. One is to just calm Putin down, and the other one is to wipe Putin out. I don't have that answer. I know what I personally would do, but uh, I I would do whatever it takes to stop the war. That's what I would do. Stop the death and destruction.
So, when you shared the context of the beginning of the war, you said a few interesting things, like something that's always been on my mind. And just to be clear, like it sounds like you and I are philosophically the same. We should have before the war was started, we should have ramped up our support of Ukraine with full American muscle and strength. That war should never have gotten to that point. But why, in your opinion, did we have all of this information coming? Our intelligence showed, to your point, the Russian military amassing massive amounts of soldiers right on the border of Ukraine. He was projecting verbally that he was going to attack Ukraine. Why did America not step in and intervene at that point in time? What was the problem?
Well, first of all, I would say that was the Europeans, first and foremost. It's right in their backyard. And this idea that they can always, uh, go to the United States to fix their problems. Trump has been right about that from the very beginning. They never invested in their own security. So, first of all, to your question, they didn't have the means to do it. That's number one, Mark. It's simple. The simple answer.
The Europeans, you're talking now
Europeans didn't
France,
have the means.
Germany,
Right.
UK.
Germany, France, Italy, they didn't have the means to do it because they didn't invest in their security. So they had to call us. And I think secondly, is that there wasn't the leadership. There wasn't the leadership to stop it before it began. There was no
The
one. There
American
was no
leadership now,
strong.
or you're talking about
Certainly, American leadership. European leadership, but even American leadership. Um, we didn't have the leadership to stop this when we saw what was going to happen, to go and figure out what had to be done to keep it from happening. It's always easier to keep it from happening than try to stop it after it's. And then once it did happen, again, I don't think we had the leadership to say, okay, how do we end this? No one, and to this day, I can't get this answer, Mark. And I just asked this at a conference I was at in New Delhi a month ago, and I said, "Well, what does winning look like? I mean, you know, what we are out to win, right? All right. So, what does that look like? If you don't know what that looks like, how are you going to get there?" And I haven't heard that answer. I have yet to hear an answer. What does winning look like? What does standing up to Putin mean? I asked that at the same conference. Someone said, "Well, we have to stand up to Putin." I said, "Okay, what is standing up to Putin? What does that mean?" Well, no one could answer that. So until we have leadership that can.
you mentioned earlier that, like, in the beginning of the Ukraine Russia war, that it sounds like what you were saying is that the international community, including the Europeans, France, Germany, Italy, UK, they were all right with Putin marching in and taking Ukraine.
Well, in 2014, they didn't do anything about it, right?
Hmm.
So now they it clearly appeared that it was okay if you did it fast. They expected Putin's army to overrun it quickly. They knew they didn't have the ability to stop it. But when the Ukrainians um, stood up to Putin, they were embarrassed. All of a sudden, they go, "Oh my gosh, we can't look at us. I mean, we can't look like we're not doing anything. Look at the Ukrainians; they're dying." And then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, they started pounding their chests and say, "We have to help the Ukrainians win this." Of course, no one ever defining what winning looks like. And I'm not sure we go out to win anymore, Mark. I mean, whether it was it's in Afghanistan, anywhere. I mean, Do we go out to win? Um, Look how many years we spent in Afghanistan and how we left. And it's exactly where it was where if we hadn't been there.
So, in your opinion, what is winning? Like, how would you define, again, staying focused on Ukraine, Russia? What would be a victory for, let's say, America?
It would be a victory if we stopped the death and the destruction, stop the bombs and stop the shooting. A ceasefire would be a victory. But how do you get to a ceasefire? That's the question. And I'm afraid that no one's prepared to do what it would take with Putin to get to a ceasefire.
Well, let's break it down for a second. I know that you're very well read on Putin, and I know that you're in a certain way an expert actually on Putin, and certainly an expert on geopolitics. Who is Vladimir Putin? Do we even understand this person?
Yeah, I think we can. And after 20 years of him being in power, it's not like we don't, we can't look at it, how he's behaved over 20 years. There's two amazing books. One is The Man Without a Face and Putin's People. Uh, you read these two books, that will give you a real insight to who Putin is. But we've had 20 years to observe him. We watched what he did in 2014 in Ukraine and in Georgia. Um, we know the history of Russia, which has a very high threshold for pain, very high, something Americans do not have, right? We have, we have been very fortunate to live in the United States of America. We've been coddled.
Yeah.
We don't know what war is. We really don't know what that is. We've never had it on our soil. So I think we don't have a frame of reference, and that's difficult. All right. So, but we know who Putin is. We know what he understands. We know what his goals are. We know how he thinks. Um, the question is, how do you take that information and make it work for you and do what you have to do to bring him to heel? Can Putin be brought to heel? Yes, I believe any criminal like that can be brought to heel. But you have to be willing to, and that takes a lot of courage, and Europe doesn't have it. Europe doesn't have the leadership, and it doesn't have the courage, and it doesn't have, quite frankly, the ability, because we uh, we guaranteed its security for so long, and that peace dividend. They built their countries, but they didn't build their security, and we could take that. That's another conversation in their energy security. I mean, they were all dependent on the cheap energy from Russia without thinking about knowing who Putin is, knowing what he did in 2014. We know who he is, and yet they continued to have their energy security dependent on Vladimir Putin. Well, how does that make any sense, Mark? How is that any planning? I mean, then what do you do? I mean, without energy, we don't have anything. All right. So we have no jobs, we have no factories, we have nothing. We have no hospitals, nothing works. So what were they thinking when they were putting that energy policy together? At least Trump understands that. He's made us energy independent.
What was the American government thinking in allowing for our allies to put those energy policies together with Russia when they could have just done it with us?
You know, Mark, I was there when Trump, as his ambassador, the first term, when he said, pay your 2%, and they all went crazy. They called us every name. They said the United States can't be counted on. We're not good partners. We're not good allies. Why? Because Trump put a mirror up to them. And they had to look in that mirror and realize that they hadn't made that investment and that the American people were just not going to do that anymore. And it was time for them to do it.
Right.
So they need, they, President Trump's the first president that's come along that has said to them, all right, you have to take responsibility for your security. And you can't be good at it's actually the other way around, Mark. It's when they say we're a bad ally because of this, it's the other way around. How can they be good allies when they can't possibly, they don't have a tank that'll go a mile? So how are they good allies to us? If we needed to call on our allies, they couldn't come to our defense because they aren't capable of it, because they never invested.
Right. So take me back to Vladimir Putin then with regards to Ukraine, Russia. So we know where it started. What about his perspective? What's his end goal? What's his end game? What's his strategy? How does he get the win?
Well, I think a lot of people forget or don't understand that a lot of what he does is for domestic consumption. Um, he he controls that narrative in Russia, and the Russian people are quite happy. I mean, they have food on the table. Anyone who thinks these sanctions have worked don't understand them because they haven't. Of course, they never have. They didn't work in Venezuela. They didn't work in North Korea. They haven't worked. So he tells them a story that Ukraine belongs to them and that bad things are happening in Ukraine and it's going to spill over if he doesn't take control of it. So people who don't realize that he has a whole campaign, he's very popular, Mark. He's very, very popular in Russia. So clearly what he's telling them, they're believing. And so his end game is to stay in power, one, right? Two, to grab as much territory that he can to enhance their power. And he's allied himself, although he is the junior partner in that partnership with China. Nevertheless, for the time being, it's working very well for him. And for China, it's working well because China is our number one adversary. And so they've allied with Russia. Smart move on Putin's part. Smart move. And Russia isn't Cuba, Mark. It's the largest landmass on Earth. So it's not like, we can just isolate them.
Sure.
There's a lot of people we don't like doing business with, but we're going to have to deal with Putin.
So are you saying that like since the Russians since we imposed sanctions against Russia since the war started, are you saying that they are proving that they can be entirely autonomous? They don't need to rely on America and our allies in the EU, and in fact their economy has flourished since the sanctions started?
I didn't look at the price of the Russian what is it called? The Russian money. On the tip of my tongue. But anyway, I didn't look at it today. But I can tell you that from the beginning of the war till now, it hasn't decreased very much. They are on a economic war footing.
Wow.
They put themselves on that. So they are manufacturing. They have worked around manufacturing what they need. But more importantly, Mark, who's with us? They're still having their oil and gas purchased by China, India, Africa, South America. So exactly who is with us in this? They're not hurting.
Right.
So we don't buy it, but we never needed it.
You talk about isolation. It's kind of interesting because even from a communications perspective, under the Biden administration, we stopped speaking with Putin. There was like a good 3-year period or so where Biden and Putin didn't even speak. And
No
now
one.
we've shifted. We've shifted. I think President Trump had a lengthy conversation with Vladimir Putin via telephone just this week, right?
2
As we're
days ago.
recording
2 days
this
ago.
conversation. So the former administration didn't speak to Putin at all, and that didn't really work. It looks like that didn't help at all.
Does
The
it
war is
ever
still
work?
going, and Russia keeps flourishing, right? So that didn't work. And a lot of critics of Trump say, well, whoa, you're talking to him. And they all start the nonsense about like Trump and Putin being best friends and Trump is a puppet for Putin and all that. But tell me, what do you think we need to do now that the channel of communication has reopened? First, how did, in your interpretation, what transpired with their conversation this week and how did it go? And then where do we go from here as it relates to communicating with Russia?
Look, how do you fix anything if you don't talk? I mean,
Tough to talk. It's difficult to speak with your enemies, right?
but if you don't talk to your enemies, then where do you go from there? I don't understand how that works, but um, I don't think the call was as positive as President Trump would have liked to have been. I think that Putin is proving to be far more difficult than um, President Trump expected. President Trump's brilliance is in how he takes enemies and he puts his arms around them. And it's like anything in life, Mark. I hate you, all right, but I kiss you. I hug you and kiss you. That's
Keep your
tough,
enemies close.
How do you
Mhm.
how do you continue to hate someone, right? Who says, you know
Sure.
what? But
It's
they
a
put
lot
their
of
arm
work.
around you. Okay, he's
It's a lot
brilliant.
of work
Look what he did in
take
North
care.
Korea. It's brilliant, Mark.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yep.
And but the question is, and it truly is brilliant. And all these people say you shouldn't step foot in North Korea. I thought it was genius, positive genius. Gave him enough recognition that calmed that little creep down. All right.
Yeah, it did. Sure.
But at some point, Putin may prove to only understand force and strength. And if that's what it is, then it is really not so much our effort. The Europeans have to decide. It's on their border. We have an ocean. They have to decide. Are they all in or not? They can't expect the president of the United States to fix all of their problems. I'm sorry, but they have to take some responsibility for this, Mark.
So are they ready though, Ambassador Mosbacher? Like, in my opinion, Poland is, really interesting to look at. And obviously you have just a tremendous amount of intelligence, expertise, and relationships on the ground in Poland. They're interesting to look at because as a nation, I think they're very impressive. They've really
Oh
grown
yes.
quite a bit in so many different ways, not just their GDP, but in so many different ways over the past 10 years or so. But they're a threat too, as far as like their closeness, their proximity with Russia. I have friends in Warsaw that, whether it's founded or not, they are concerned about their safety. They're concerned about Poland. So like in your perspective, like what's happening on the ground as it relates to the Polish perspective of Putin and Russia?
Poland knows they're very realistic. They are now the leader in NATO, 4.5%. Um, they're building their resilience, both energy independence and their military. However, they know they can't defeat Russia alone, no matter what they do. There are 38 million people. They can't do it. They know that. They know that they need allies. That's the reason they're investing in their own security. But at the same time, they understand they're in a very difficult place because if their neighbors aren't willing to step up, they know they can't do it alone. That's why it's so important to them, this relationship they have with us, because they know they cannot count on the French, the Germans, the Italians. They know that.
And philosophically, they're more aligned with America and the
Oh,
Trump
absolutely.
administration, I would imagine. I'm really asking you than Macron and all of
Oh,
them.
no, look, they love Americans. There's 10 million of Poles in the United States. Uh, we have a historic, going back to our Civil War connection with them. But they're realistic, Mark. There's 38 million of them. No matter how much money they spend on their security, no matter how big they build their army, they can never defeat Russia on their own. This idea that Ukraine can, uh, I ask you, what is that about? Did anyone ever believe that Ukraine could beat Russia on their own? So they understand how important these alliances are, but they also understand that they have to take on responsibility, and they have to invest. So I just don't think Europe is awakened to that reality, no matter what.
Do you think that the short term imminent threat of Russia attacking other nations beyond Ukraine is real?
Yes, very real. I can remember my briefings uh, when I was ambassador about the Balkans. They can take the Balkans overnight, right? Or the Baltics, I'm sorry. The Baltics, they can take the Baltics overnight, the Russians. There's nothing really we could do about it. I mean, not really, because it's right there. Um, and yes, I do think that there is a threat if Putin believes that he can get away with it. I mean, look, uh, if he, if you can take the property next door to yours without much, with with very little effort, what you're going to take it. Um, it's a Putin, to understand him. He believes that he has to rebuild the Russian Empire, just like Xi Jinping believes that Taiwan belongs to China. If you don't understand their history, you don't understand how they think, you don't understand their culture, then you can't understand that this is very visceral for them, right? So if you're going to stop them, you have to stop them, literally stop them, or you have to find a way to make some sort of deal with them to stop the killing and the destruction. Somewhat what we've done in Korea, right? The demilitarized zone.
If you were going to provide President Trump and Secretary Rubio with advice as it relates to stopping the war in Ukraine, Russia, what advice would you provide?
Well, I think they're on the right track. They're talking. I mean, that's first of all. I mean that, and President Trump is a genius at making these kind of deals. However, I personally, I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but I wouldn't have sat and waited 3 hours for Putin if I was the emissary, the president. No way. Maybe
What are you
an hour.
referencing? What are you
Well,
referencing?
we sent we President Trump sent Witkoff to negotiate with President Putin, and my understanding is it may have been longer, but I understand it was at least 3 hours he waited. I think it's insulting, and I would have left. So maybe I'm not such a great diplomat because I'd have gotten up, I'd have left and said, please tell President Putin, I understand he has a busy schedule and we'll reschedule this. But I don't wait. I'm the emissary from the President of the United States and I'm not going to wait. I also probably would have hung up the phone and sent a fleet of F 16s right over to Ukraine and bomb the hell out of Moscow. But oh my God, I'm going to get in such trouble for this. And I would have said, then I'd have gotten on the phone with Putin and said, oh, wait, don't take it personally. There's nothing personal. I want a ceasefire. Let's work this out. Just because we sent F 16s and a couple of missiles that could reach Moscow doesn't mean, please don't misunderstand that, President Putin. Don't take it personally. This is a war and we're just doing our part, but I want a ceasefire. But if I don't get one, the next city will be your second biggest city in Russia. Let's see how long your people go along with that. I wouldn't have put American troops. I would have sent the planes to the Ukrainians because we can't have NATO involved. But it doesn't mean we can't give it all to the Ukrainians because they're willing to do it. They're willing to die for it, and they're willing to do that. Now I'm going to be in big. Mark, you're going to get me. You really hope you're going to get me in big trouble for this.
Listen, you said it's insulting. It's interesting because it's obviously insulting to Steve Witkoff, right? To have him fly all the way to Russia and then
Insulting to
sit
the
there for
president. This
three
is the
hours.
president's. This is the president who the president chose to send. It's an insult to the president that he would make his emissary sit there and wait for that many hours. You have an appointment, you show respect. Or at least that's the way I see it.
So let's look back at politics at home then as it relates to this issue. How important is it for the Republican Party and President Trump to get some victories overseas before the midterms? Does it matter if
No,
Ukraine and Russia continue to fight by the time we get to the midterms?
no, no, Mark, I don't think it matters at all. I think American people, they care about. They work 8 hours a day. They come home, they sit down at the table. They want to make sure there's food on the table. They care about whether they can buy those bread and eggs and milk. They care about whether they have their job. They care about if the kids are in a school where they're learning to read and write. So, no, I think when it comes to to our midterm elections, it's about local politics and whether you're delivering.
When the United States provides Ukraine with weapons for war, is that good for our economy?
Well, sure, it's good for our economy. I mean, we make them, we sell them, we make a profit on them. Our military industrial complex is doing very well, Mark.
Right. So we don't really mind then if these wars keep occurring overseas, do we?
Well, I think the president does. I think he's been very clear on that. He does not, the president doesn't like war. He doesn't like seeing bombs destroy cities and kill people. So I think in the case of President Trump, we have a leader who's very clear on this. And he doesn't really care as much about the industrial military complex as much as he does care about seeing the death and destruction stop. We're still going to be fine. We're still going to be selling weapons to everyone in the world. Look, I think right now, nuclear is about to spread everywhere. Everyone's going to have a nuclear weapon in the next 20 years, 30 years. Mark, I think that's inevitable. So I don't think the planet gets any safer. So I don't think any of our companies are going to lose business. So whether we stop, maybe there's a few companies that don't make as much money as they used to, but big deal. Uh, whether the war stops in Ukraine isn't going to really make a dent in our military industrial complex. The world isn't getting any safer, and it's not going to get safer. So no, I think President Trump. We have a president that's been very clear. He doesn't like to see the death and destruction. He wants it to stop. And his strength and that message, I do believe, makes a difference. If he'd been president, I don't believe there would have been a war in the Ukraine. I absolutely don't. I believe there would
I
not
agree.
have been that war.
I fully agree. Ambassador Mosbacher, thank you so much for all of your time. I can't let you go though yet. We end the show the same way with every guest. It's a leading question that I provide, and in this instance, I want your prediction. I incorporate the name of the show, Some Future Day, which is
I
a
love it.
James Joyce reference, by the
Mhm.
way.
And
Um, and I'm gonna, if it's all right with you, I'd like to have you participate, but within the context of this Ukraine-Russia war. You game?
I'm game.
All right. So, in some future day, Ukraine and Russia will stop fighting. The war will end when?
When? Ooh, that's a tough one, isn't it? That's a tough one. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. Um, I think that we're probably looking at certainly not within the next 12 months. If we're lucky, before President Trump will be able to end it before his term is up, and I think he can. I think he will accomplish that.
What needs to happen? What needs to happen to make that war stop?
I think President Putin has to understand that Europe and NATO are now really energized, and what he has created. It's a very formidable, formidable NATO. I think that's what President Trump has done. And NATO was really just a paper tiger before. But now they're investing, Mark. And I think that Trump has really energized that. And I think that Putin now realizes, the day he realizes that Europe isn't going to buy his oil and is literally has the security guarantees in place, that he will realize he can't move any further. And this is a time to make nice with his neighbors.
Ambassador Mosbacher, it's so nice to have you on Some Future Day. Your insight and expertise is unparalleled. Truly an honor. Thank you so much.
Mark, it's always a pleasure because you always get people thinking. You have a way. And also, you have an incredible talent of getting people to say things they might never say because it's not politically correct. So I give you that. But I also am going to blame you, Mark, when I get beaten over the head with it. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of your show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Some Future Day. I know your time is super valuable, so I hope you learned how you can leverage emerging technology to improve your life. And exciting news, my new book, Some Future Day, How AI is Going to Change Everything, is now available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and other major booksellers across the globe. I'm so proud to share that because of your support, the book topped the charts. It became #1 bestseller in cryptocurrency, #1 bestseller in artificial intelligence, and #1 bestseller in robotics. So, if you're curious and ready to learn how AI can enhance your career, your community, and your family, get yourself a copy today.